This video, I'm going to read a couple of thesis statements submitted by the class. I'm going to be looking at the rubric that was used, which is actually scored out of 5 in comparison to the essay rubric, which just has 3 parts. The language is still the same. The only difference is I added these sections right here, which is a kind of an in-between section. Let's take a look at some of these right here. I'm going to first start off with this generational theory one. For no other reason other than I know the students usually struggle with this. Generations get their names based on significant historical events. Okay, that is somewhat true, but usually this is defined. Generations get their definition oddly from like articles and usually some high-ranking official or somebody in the public spotlight. I would say that seems to be somewhat inaccurate, but not really too much important. Generations get their names based on significant historical events that occurred during the span of the generation. That seems to be factual. It seems to be very basic. There really isn't anything here that's unique. It's just factual information. And people within generations experience the same events during a period of time and may have similar views on world issues. Now we're starting to see some confusion. Now you can probably take this and I would say this could be one essay within itself, this first portion. If you could clearly identify and define using evidence how generations get their name, that would actually count as a paper. Give me some examples of, 3 to 4 sources that support that argument that generations get their name. As written here, though, it just says historical events. Historical events cannot name a generation. That's just impossible. Let's take a look at the second point. People within generations experience the same events during a period of time and may have similar views on world issues. This really isn't a thesis. I know I cut this into 2 sections, but the reason why I did that, I think these are 2 separate papers. And if there's one way that you could somehow extract a thesis according to the class standard, you could probably go with either of the 2. I'll still look at this though. Generations experience the same events during a period of time. If you're arguing that they have similar views on the world, what's your evidence? This definitely is going to be difficult to support. I would say this seems to be very confusing, but when I'm reading this collectively as one thesis statement right here, I don't quite get a sense of anything that is factual. I don't know what they're going to use as clear, precise evidence. It just seems that this could be all over the place and they need to be a little more precise, lacks some detail, and it has some clarity issues. Let's go on to the next one. During the civil rights movement, okay, now there's a problem already with this because the civil rights movement is really about the 1960s, 1950s, and Ida B. Wells is someone in the 1920s. Now, I get it, both are advocating for civil rights, but this has specific historical meaning. Ida B. Wells played a key role in the fight for African Americans. You're not saying exactly the key role. I would say this is an opportunity for you to answer the questions how or why. I mean, you're saying that she played a key role. Well, how does the reader know that? What exactly are you arguing? But they do kind of address that. Using her skills in writing, I don't know how you would gauge skills in writing. Are you going to cite all of her test scores from school? I mean, I guess that would work. I don't know that I would want to read that essay. To project her thoughts and speeches to large crowds and publishing articles about the unfair treatment in the South. This needs some work. I would say you definitely want to cut this part. Let's see. Ida B. Wells played a key role. I would cut the key role part out. You could say Ida B. Wells wrote published articles, and went on speaking tours. But you're going to need to actually cite something that is specific. Like, what articles are you going to actually cite? What speeches are you actually going to reference that she suggested? Feel free to cite those and put those names into the thesis statement. That's how you add precision. Ida B. Wells used different types of tactics during her fight against segregation. Okay, well, what were those tactics that she used? Is this going to be an essay that's going to focus on tactics? Like, are you going to use Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois, and you're just going to give me kind of like a list in a T-chart form? This is what she did, this is what he did. This is what she did, this is what he did. Ida B. Wells used different types of tactics. Like, it seems like you're comparing it, and I don't necessarily know if that's the route against segregation. Her public speeches, I'll be concerned about the word, but her public speeches against racial lynchings were the most vital. This right here seems to be vague. You're making a judgment about it being vital. I would definitely say that this needs some work. Ida B. Wells used different types of tactics during her fight against segregation, but her public speeches against racial lynchings were the most vital. This does not seem to be historic. I would get rid of that. This needs some precision. During the 20s, women such as Maria Cui and Margaret Sanger. Now we're getting specific. You're telling me you're writing about these two women. You're giving me the year. Work to provide abortions to women experiencing unwanted pregnancy. Like right here, work to provide abortions. You know, you could ask her, or you could add, you could give me a list of how. Like, how exactly did they do that? But the problem is that's one essay right here. This would count as one. Experiencing unwanted pregnancies, where they go with this. Mary Queen Margaret Sanger worked to provide abortions to women experiencing unwanted pregnancies. Okay, I mean, I guess this works as, that kind of counts. These would be the women, but maybe you can kind of end here. But then it's getting confusing. Challenge the previously established Comstock Act. I mean, that could be a separate paper within itself. How Maria Cui and Margaret Sanger challenged the Comstock Act, and then you give me a list of the things that they did regarding the illegal use of contraceptives and bringing to light. That seems to be some slang. The birth control movement, in order to help them, it's all over the place. They seem to have three separate issues, and I would say probably focus on one of them. Challenge, how did they do this, or how did they provide those abortions, or how do they go about this particular point? But this one concerns me because I don't necessarily know that you're going to find anything that really supports that particular point. Let's move on here. Got some of those. I want to get something different. Henry Ford's mass production techniques. Such as, like what? What exactly are those techniques? All right, well, they have that. Forming an assembly line. I would have gotten rid of that comma and I would have just put it. Henry Ford's mass production techniques, such as forming an assembly line to increase efficiency. This actually can be two separate issues, but they do lead. I mean, the assembly line is going to lead to efficiency. Using more modern tools, I would probably then get rid of that to lower the full dependence on mechanics. I know exactly what this reference here means, using modern tools to lower the full dependence on mechanics. But right there, this is a completely separate topic here than this one. And what you would want to do for the first essay is take like one of these issues and ask the question how or why. And then your answer to that question is actually where you're going to start to have some analysis, and you can probably provide some sources that support that. And increasing worker wages to avoid employee turnover. This is an unrelated separate issue. Lower the production. And this is an outcome. The second part is an outcome. We have a couple things going on here. This is an outcome. And it could be an outcome of this. But then this right here is its own separate paper, as with this second point there. If you're going, I know there's an issue about the enumerated thesis. For this paper, you can have one clear point in your thesis, but the minute you start breaking it down into three, make sure that they're clearly related. What I see here is lowering the production of the car is very different from forming an assembly line. You could break this down into three specific issues, and that's definitely going to show you an in-depth understanding of that issue. But this really seems to be about three totally unrelated issues. I would want to work on that. Although it was invented to perform basic calculations, come on, you're making an assumption here. I'm offended at that point. The Z1 computer, created in 1938, was the first machine to accept binary code, which is still a key aspect. This right here seems to be talking about today, which is not allowed. This clearly is not historic, and you want to avoid that. Focus more on what this computer did for the people in the 1930s, and definitely want to look at the prompt. If you're doing any of the computer topics, make sure you don't make it too technical. Try to focus on the benefits for society in that period, and avoid making connections to present day. One last one. Debate over what is considered an act of terrorism, what it means, is rampant. I don't know what this means, due to the fact that there are plenty of factors. The debate over what is considered an act of terrorism varies based on plenty of factors, and then I would want to know like what those factors are. And they kind of get to that particular point right here, such as what motivated the person to commit this act. But I do know that the FBI has a definition. I know the UN has a definition. I know the CIA has a definition. There's so many different definitions of terrorism. I'm sure you can easily find some articles on JSTOR that get into that debate. For this topic, you're outlining this issue that terrorism varies based on the person or the organization defining it. And then in marking periods 2 to 4, you'll be able to get to specific acts of terrorism and then apply this definition. During the 20s, many new expensive items were being bought, like radios and washing machines, and were largely accessible due to credit being expanded. I don't know what credit being expanded means. I have to make an assumption about that as the reader. It's not specific. During the many new expensive, and then I would also say this is too factual. There really doesn't seem to be anything other than here's just the information. It's really not unique. Uh, you're going to probably, with this essay, find plenty of stuff about, like, the depression was caused as a result of overuse of credit. And there's just nothing really unique. That's too factual of a thesis. I probably would make some changes to that. One more. Despite the horrific reports sent by Ambassador Morgenthau, mass killing, deportation, the U.S. federal government withheld from recognizing the Armenian genocide. This actually is something that's going on all the way to Obama's presidency, and now they're giving due stance regarding the maintenance of positive relationship with the Ottoman Empire. The United States really was on the side of the Allies. That would make them an enemy. You don't even have like any year here that would possibly make this point that I just critiqued valid, depending on the year. Driven by the stance to maintain neutrality. Now they're bringing up neutrality in the war. You could probably just argue that this was about neutrality. The problem there is then you are making an assumption about whether the United States needs to get involved based on what this individual here was experiencing. That's all I have to say on this one. Definitely will suggest maybe you take a look at some of the samples here. Uh, that way you can have an understanding. Maybe you want to complete this outline packet here. That would help. This right here also seems to be helpful, where you can use this to try to direct your analysis. Like, you want to keep answering this question: why does the cited source support your thesis? And you want to kind of go back to that point. That's it.